the position that I've taken and that my company has taken is that core property of Bitcoin is its decentralization, right? And one of the things that we all have learned in the past time is that decentralization comes at a heavy cost, right? Every decentralized technology has to pay the cost of decentralization because decentralization is inefficient by its design. It's not more efficient; it's less efficient. All other things being equal, but like one of the efficiencies is that it's it works independent of regulations and it's hard to regulate and so on. But that also comes from the it comes from the decentralization. That's why we have mining, which burns energy and all of that. And so I think that there's a lot of people who have opinions that shouldn't really be having opinions. Like I think that the scaling debate revolves around a couple of technical questions that have clear answers, and there is a certain Trump factor in the whole thing where you're on equal terms discussing things that are like basically consensus among people with understanding of the core technology, and some other people who are just like some guy with a company with an opinion, so on. And it's like it's not entirely fair to present them as 50-50. I think that, and I mean, we as a company are obviously very affected by the limitations of transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain and so on. As I mentioned, already today we're arguably one of the largest, if not the largest, e-commerce merchants in the world when it comes to Bitcoin, which is kind of strange because we're like a small company, but if you compare, and another thing is that there's very little metrics out there, right? Nobody really shares what's going on, and that's also kind of strange. And something that we're going to work on trying to change and getting more transparency. Because the blockchain is public, right? And you should be able to account for there's 3 transactions per second. It comes out to I did the math sometime, but like it was like around 8 million transactions per month, which is like okay, whatever. It's a finite number, right? Okay, let's try to identify what are these transactions, where are they coming from, where are they going, what are they trying to accomplish, and see how can we improve these use cases, because people are talking about these coffee transactions as if it was a thing, but it's not a thing, like nobody is buying coffee with Bitcoin, and so like for reference, okay, so BitRefill does currently around 17,000 Bitcoin transactions per month, which as reference, the last numbers that BitPay shared. BitPay is the big merchant service provider that has hundreds of thousands of merchants all over the world, like the big gorilla. They did 200,000. So they're 10 or 15 times larger than us, but we're just one merchant, with this one little thing. And so we are very much affected, and many of our customers do very low value transactions. We have people in Bangladesh who will do transactions of all the way down to 10 euro cents. But say the average transaction in the system is around 5 euros, and some of them are like, there are a lot of them that are below euro transactions. So we're obviously very affected, and it would be easy for us to say, hey, yeah, sure, let's do this thing, let's change, make a hard fork, this and that, and it'll be much easier. It actually will be free. But you need to think about what it costs, and breaking the consensus rules and breaking the core tenet sort of Bitcoin as a centralized store of value. And I think that that's not worth it. And I think that the user experience problems that Bitcoin has right now, and this is actually a blog post that's going to come out very soon, but if you look at the user experience problems, some of them are related to the congestion and so on, but a lot of them are actually like very, very, a lot simpler issues, and it's kind of strange when there are things that are very obviously broken that could be fixed, that are that are fixable, that just aren't being, they're not being worked on, and it's that are not controversial in any way. Just figuring out the way of making Bitcoin links that are clickable and that just work. They still, a lot of the time they don't work with normal browsers. And I don't think there would be anyone be opposed to someone build a JavaScript library that makes it work in a good way. Like there's so many things that are obvious and uncontroversial that haven't been done yet, and there's so many aspects of Bitcoin that haven't been fully explored, and people are proposing this crazy change that we don't really know. Like there's no documented examples of anything like that being successfully performed, and the only one we know is what happened with Ethereum, and that arguably failed miserably. And people are just let's do it, let's see what happens, because that's an entrepreneurial perspective, right? And as an entrepreneur, I can be like that as well with our company. Let's just deploy, see what happens. If we break something, we'll roll it back. If we break something for users, we'll compensate them, right? But Bitcoin doesn't work like that. It's a decentralized consensus system. If you break it, then you break it. And so I think that a certain cautionary principle is important, and I think that there are a lot of user experience problems that would be solved by a layer 2 system that need a layer 2 system anyway, regardless of the whole how many transactions fit in a block. There's a whole bunch of things that will need to be fixed, and I don't see a reason to focus energy on that instead of just focusing on the things that are there that are uncontroversial. That's a good question. Yeah, how does it affect our company? Because at the end of the day, we're going towards, like I said, that there's a lot of user experience problems in Bitcoin right now, many of which are unrelated or not directly caused by the limited block space. But fun enough, the solution sometimes is the same. So the direction in which we're moving as a company, actually, it sort of goes well with the limited block space, even for other reasons. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So transactions are on Bitcoin are expensive. They are regardless of the block situation, right? If you're doing a transaction for 10 cents value, a fee of even 1 cent is probably too high. Whereas today the fees are sometimes 30-40 cents per Bitcoin, so there's 400% fee, right? So we need to figure out ways to get to do fewer Bitcoin transactions, right? And then that puts us into the question of how can we do that? So one of the things is that we're making user accounts. And again, we're still I would argue that we're a small actor in this. We're a small company. We can't dedicate a full-time engineer for a year to build cool second layer solutions. If we could, we would. But so what are the things we can do? Well, we can have user accounts, right? So if we have a user account, the users deposit Bitcoin, and they can deposit Bitcoin that's worth a couple of transactions, and they can do several refills from their account balance, right? So that lowers the cost for us of Bitcoin transactions. Other ways is doing off-chain transactions. Many of the popular Bitcoin services, the hosted wallets like Coinbase and Xapo and some of the others, they have APIs. They're not perfect, but they have them. So it's possible to do integrations and let people do transactions that are entirely off-chain, that don't create a Bitcoin transaction. That is, this refill transaction happening inside Coinbase, and it went to our account with Coinbase, and then we withdraw it afterwards. It's not always ideal, but it does solve a lot of the user experience problems that we have otherwise. So, for example, Some of the user experience problems that I mentioned. Okay, Bitcoin links don't work, right? If you do a pay with Coinbase button, then the link works. You have people entering the wrong amounts. It's a big problem for us. That a user will send for all kinds of reasons. The price for this refill is 0.0042. And user sends us 0.03868. Why did they do that? Hard to know. Something went wrong somewhere, right? And there's different reasons. Sometimes the user misunderstood. Sometimes the user sent a fiat equivalent balance. So they would send, they thought it would cost you $15 and they sent $15, but we calculated it differently. So we have a different amount. Or things like, just sometimes there's no Bitcoin blocks for 2 hours, right? Just for no reason, there was nothing wrong with the transaction. It just took 2 hours for it to confirm. Like, that's always been the case, right? And that's always been a big problem. And like things like that are solved by doing transactions off-chain today. Like, you can argue ideologically that it's not decentralized, this and that, but and that's true. Like, but on the other hand, it has a better user experience today, right? When the day comes and we're very supportive of it, where we have decentralized solutions like payment channels, or Lightning networks, and all of that, we'd be super excited about that as well, because then we would be able to do these transactions in a programmatic way, and we would be able to make sure that things happen, things go right to a larger extent. That's what I'm seeing right now is that there's some people that are arguing about something that to me is strange, because some of the important arguments are not you have, to me it's very strange that founders of big companies in the space are arguing about things, but they themselves haven't published their data. Reveal it. If you I'm not saying that you have to do it, but I'm saying that if you want to be taken seriously with the opinion that you have, and you are in control of data that would sort of strengthen your point, then I think you should reveal that. Because if you don't reveal that and you make an argument, then I'm going to be like, I don't know. Maybe you are, maybe not. This is a trustless, decentralized system based on lies and thieves and crooks. And so you shouldn't trust anyone's word. But why aren't people publishing? Why is it still today not known? What are things what are people buying with Bitcoin? What are these 8 million transactions a month? Where are they going? If it was coffee, then sure, show me. And I'm happy. At first that's one of the changes that we've been doing. That first we were very keep our numbers to ourselves because everyone else is. But I think that in the end it just creates a strange scenario where, and because it's hard, if you have small but real numbers, it's hard to compete with someone who has large but fake numbers, right? But I think that in the end that's what we have to do, and to encourage others to also share their numbers, because in a consensus system there needs to be a consensus about the strategy and the moves that are happening, and for that to happen, people need to know, right? You need to have information about what is the status quo really, and the blockchain is an open system, and I think there are things related to it that there could be more openness about, and just plain blockchain analysis. There's several companies that that specialize in that, in doing data mining on the blockchain, and it's pretty easy to determine which wallet belongs to which startup and so on. Why doesn't someone just do that as an academic project and publish that data so we would know what is going on and how can we make it better? What I see is that with this whole scaling debate, there's, as the tone and the threats are increasing, as the stakes are getting higher and higher and higher in this whole debate, or if ever do say fight, even. this creates very strong pressure for people to learn, because we're approaching a scenario where, you know, there might be a big controversial change, or not, which is also in itself controversial, right? And people are realizing that they need to, you know, educate themselves and form an opinion and educate people around them, so that there is, because the system has very strong incentives to maintain consensus. And so what I'm seeing, which is actually very interesting, is that, like, under the threat of, like, you know, guns pointing at each other, the community is educating itself really fast. And, you know, whenever someone posts something stupid on Twitter, which happens all the time, right? There's a lot of stupid stuff being said in this field. And instantly, there's a lot of people, both trolls, but also like friends of the people that are in well-meaning ways, you know, reaching out, like, hey, listen, I think you need to educate yourself about this and that. And you can be sure that as much as we're seeing of that in the public realm, there's even more of that going on, you know, in private forums of different sorts, because this is an important thing. And it's like, you know, if you see a friend or an associate, you know, just arguing for the wrong thing, it's and in this case, like, there are certain things are values, right? You know, trade-offs between decentralization and performance. You know, it's a values question, where you put which amount of decentralization you want at which cost. That's a pure values question. But there are questions in this that have clear answers. You know, like right and wrong. You know, and there is misinformation going around. And what I think is super interesting that with this whole threat of a fork and so on is, like, I would still say that, like, pretty quickly there was like a realization from a lot of people that were previously like, I don't need to take part of this. It's just, you know, that's just some bullshit. That's just Americans fighting on Reddit. Let's just ignore them. And as people realize, okay, whoa, we can't continue ignoring them. We need to, like, have our voices heard. Suddenly, people started speaking out. You know, people started dropping this notion of, you know, political neutrality, or, you know, that like all opinions have equal value and all of that people generally like to do, and been like, no, wait, you know, we actually think this, and this is the reason. And so you've seen, I would say, the debate has leveled up, and the amount of, like, ignorant stuff coming from industry leaders is decreasing, and we're seeing people changing their opinions in all kinds of directions. And I think that in itself is a very healthy sign, right? And some of it is hard, because some people have been saying things for many years that weren't true, right? And so for them, and especially if you were a Bitcoin advocate, you know, and you've been going around and saying that Bitcoin transactions are cheap, right? And suddenly the evidence is that these are not cheaper than non-Bitcoin transactions, right? And so you know, and like, what would you do when you've based your whole public identity on, you know, promoting that aspect of it? And yet many people have been like, okay, yeah, well, maybe we misunderstood this thing. Maybe we should have listened to the engineers that said that, hey, that's not strictly true what you're saying, and so on. And so in the end, what I'm seeing is that there's, you know, expectations of Bitcoin are going down a little bit, you know, like some of the loftier promises, or people are like, yeah, okay, maybe, you know, maybe like little things, they're like, maybe it doesn't do that, maybe it doesn't do that, maybe it doesn't have all those benefits. But instead, people are focusing on the benefits that it does have, right? And the benefits that it's obvious to anyone that it does have. You know, it is inflation-proof sound money that you can transport across borders. Like, just that is pretty magical. It is a permissionless system, and that everyone can start participating in without any requirements, and so on. And so I think that it sort of makes it less exciting, but also it's makes it more useful, and it's in the Gartner hype cycle, like I think we're reaching the bottom the bottom of it now, where many of the false expectations are being washed out, and we've gone through a couple of cognitive dissonance phases, with the whole blockchain technology thing, and there was cryptocurrencies, and there was distributed ledger technology and all of that, and that people are slowly starting to backtrack on a little bit and say like, okay, yeah, we don't know, these things are maybe one day, but if the science allows it, but we don't know. But okay, but what do we have now? Well, okay, this is this valuable thing that you can send over the internet. All right, let's focus on that. And at the same time, like some of the people that in this establishment of consensus, there are some people that are driven away, like either voluntarily because they're just like, then it's not interesting, if there's no smart contracts and assets and this and that, and I'm gonna go do something else, and they go and they'll do Ethereum, or something else, which I think also is like it's a good development. Like either you acknowledge that what you've been saying hasn't been true, and you participate in this thing with the things that are commonly acknowledged as valid and true, or if that's not enough for you, if you want more magic qualities, perpetual motion machine type stuff, you move out to another ecosystem which encourages that, which you can have your own perspective on as well. But in a way that's helpful. That's helpful because then pie in the sky people will do something else. They will go. The advocates can go and advocate for Ethereum, while the rest of us just build something useful with what we have. And so I think that the lowest common denominator of knowledge and understanding is increasing, and like the amount of knowledge that is agreed upon by everyone and understood mutually by everyone is increasing at a very rapid pace right now, because there is this sort of gun to the head threat that like if you don't educate yourself, like something really bad is going to happen. And I think that's in the end is a very strong signal, and it is constructive. And I think in some ways that may also be one of the reasons why, but this is me speculating, but like that might be the reason why the Bitcoin price is going up. But then again, so is Ethereum, so I don't know. Yes, I think so. I think there's just from the finger in the air approach, I'm noticing more and more people that are non-Bitcoiners that are I want to buy a Bitcoin, or just buy a couple, see what's going on. I think that the value proposition of it being a hedge, a sort of uncorrelated asset, that's something that many people can sort of understand. Like if it all goes to hell, well, at least I'll have some Bitcoins. So I would say yes, I'm seeing that just here in Sweden. I think, or I know that from what we've been seeing on BitRefill is that in countries with financial turmoil, you see that growing by a lot. Like we saw in the fall last year, we saw in Nigeria a big, like our numbers went 10x just 1 month suddenly in that country. And why is that? There was a bit of a perfect storm, and there is distrust in the government currency, and there is no good electronic payment systems, and there's a lot of unbanked people and so on, and that sort of is cooking now in a way where people are involving themselves in that. There's also a lot of like how I say non-productive aspects, with scams and multi-level schemes and things like that. But it is happening in several countries. We're seeing that in some Latin American countries as well. We saw that in a big way in India in the end of last year as well, with the demonetization scheme that happened there. So it is happening in a couple of places. In South Africa, it's growing a lot. It's Philippines. There's a couple of countries where Bolivia is very under understudied Venezuela, of course. Like countries where the use case of just sound money is stronger, they see a lot more of that. And that's, I guess, how it should be. That's where it should take off first. Here's a prediction that I have, is that I think very soon there will no longer be a Bitcoin rate. What is the price of Bitcoin? Because I think that we're already at the point where the price of Bitcoin is vastly different in different places, right? And the value of Bitcoin in Nigeria is 30% higher than it is in the international market. Why? Why is that? Well, because there's certain local geopolitical aspects. The value of Bitcoin is infinitely higher in Venezuela, right? Or just simple example, like right now, Bitfinex disabled withdrawals, so the value on Bitcoin on that exchange went up. And I think that as Bitcoin is growing globally, not just becoming this American Silicon Valley type thing that it was maybe in 2013-14, where it was easy to understand that the American exchange rate for Bitcoin was the exchange rate for Bitcoin, and you would calculate every country's exchange rate by multiplying how many dollars does a Bitcoin cost, and then you multiply that with the rate for Swedish kronor, and you would have the Swedish Bitcoin rate. But that's not necessarily true. And if there was an order book in Sweden, which I'm sad that there isn't, you would see that maybe the rate in Sweden would be something else. If we look at the rate in India, and it goes up and down a little bit. Sometimes there's a big premium, other days there's not. Sometimes it's a negative premium, but it's moving in different ways. And it's a different thing in different countries. And as this, it moves in some ways, that opens up opportunities for entrepreneurs or just people who want to, make a quick buck and buy here, sell there, and so on. That sort of creates a robust platform for international decentralized money, which I think is very interesting, and it's very cool to see, like how that is happening. Oof, there's so many. Yeah, my rule of thumb is that if it touches Ethereum, then it's a scam. I would say the whole ICO bubble is a scam. I think that, not that it's not possible to do an ethical ICO with which, just that there hasn't been one this far. And it's a lot of stuff that is based on a greater fool. A greater fool will sell to another greater fool, and then it's just greater fools all the way down. So I think that startups, all of the startups that have the word decentralized in their sort of tagline, it's a sure sign that it's a scam. Because again, if it's decentralized, then it's not a startup. If it's a startup, then it's not decentralized, right? If it's a decentralized Uber, what does that mean? Well, okay, it's an Uber without the company that makes money, all right? But what kind of a startup is that, right? It's maybe a useful thing. It's maybe a useful project, a worthwhile project, like open source, like lots of stuff. But it's not necessarily a startup. I think that it took a long time with open source as an example. Like, it took a long time, and I would argue that it still hasn't been entirely figured out, what the business models are for open source. In the end, it's been like, I will do consulting, or I will sell a premium version or something, and that's it sort of works. I think that the decentralized space is going to end up in something similar to that. I would say that the biggest scams, I guess, are the ones that scam the largest amounts of people for the largest amounts of money. So this right now there's a couple of prediction market projects that raised a lot of money. I would say Ethereum in itself is continuing to be scam-like in that it promises things that probably are not likely to be true. I think that there's a lot of similarities to 100 years ago, there was a lot of people searching for a perpetual motion machine, and if you have a perpetual motion machine, the business plan sort of writes itself, right? And there was a lot of money invested in that search, and so I think that a lot of people profiteered from that, from either scamming, in the best case, scamming banks or venture capitalists, but in common cases, scamming everyday people. A couple of really big ones, but that blew up recently. So 21, it raised $100 million from Andreessen Horowitz. It blew up in a big way. But they scammed Andreessen Horowitz, so you could argue that, hey, maybe they should have known better. There's R3, the bank consortium, which scammed the consortium of banks of the world. You have to, I guess, if you're not a fan of banks, you have to tip your hat to them. But with the whole, retracting, raising $100 million from banks, saying that we're going to make blockchain technology for banks, and then you realize that banks don't really need blockchains, and then you go, we never said there was going to be blockchain technology for banks, right? And like doing history revisionism and so on. That's some of the things that have been exposed lately. There's a couple of other things that it's not entirely clear. I think one of the interesting things is that we're not seeing. There's a couple of high-profile venture capitalists right now, like Andreessen and some others that have invested money in these lofty projects that can't possibly work, and or in other projects that like the ICO projects that are it might work, assuming that there is always a greater fool theory, but that's not something that I see as very worthwhile. But I would say that it's still for example, I can't say that I know of one investor that has been doing all of the right moves in this field, which in itself is kind of strange. That there's no, I don't know of anyone that has I have a good strategy. They're doing the right stuff. Again, people aren't, because the nature of it is that it encourages these wild and lofty gold projects. No one is doing the little stuff. Just for example, why is no one just trying to start a Bitcoin bank that would take your Bitcoins and give you an interest, and then try to build a reputation on that, that we're going to be reliable, which in itself is hard, obviously, but it's something that could be achievable somehow. There's ways of establishing reputation and trust and so on. But people aren't doing that because that's not sexy enough. People are doing prediction markets. I mean, look, this is a magical beans field in which most people, nobody understands all of it. Yeah, I think we spoke about that a year and a half ago as well. That no, it's a little bit, and there's a really funny comic that was going around the other day. It was a group of blind people trying to figure out what an elephant is. And someone touches the tusk and they say that it's hard and pointy, and someone else touches the elephant on the side, and it's this is solid and how do you call it, the skin of an elephant. Someone grabs the tail, and it's this is something hairy. So everyone is right in that analysis, but they're sort of missing the big picture of what it is. And it's the same with Bitcoin, that no one really understands all of it, because it's such a state of the art, computer science, cryptography, economic theory, game theory, psychology, and so on. There's you need to be a world-class expert right now in 6 very different fields, and almost no one is. And so everyone is trying to figure out from their own side, but that creates lots of opportunities for people to take advantage of that and market things to people that don't have the capacity to validate things. And there's still not, the way society has solved these matters is by building trust networks. That we have certain universities, certain scientists that are more trusted. In the end, everyone can always go and check the science for themselves, right? You read this thing in the newspaper. You could in theory find the paper that was published and read the data and replicate the experiment maybe even. But like in the end, it's all built on trust. You need to trust in the scientist, in the university, in the journalist that realize that we all know how wrong that gets. And I think that we still need to develop, especially in the Bitcoin scene, these trust networks and ways and methodologies of ironing out sort of the real stuff from the stuff that's just built to appear a certain way.